The courtroom was sterile and cold. Nothing like the warm nursery I had painted yellow 3 years ago, when I was still naive enough to believe in happy endings. As I sat there listening to my ex-husband Marcus tell the judge that I was an unfit mother, that I was emotionally unstable, and incapable of providing a proper home for our daughter Emma, I felt something inside me break. But it wasn't the same kind of breaking I had experienced 6 months earlier when I discovered his affair. This was different. This was the sound of my last illusion shattering, the final death of the woman who had spent 5 years trying to be the perfect wife to a man who saw me as nothing more than a placeholder until something better came along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice carrying that same smooth confidence that had once made me weak in the knees. Emma needs stability. She needs a parent who can provide consistency, not someone who cries at the drop of a hat and can barely hold down a job. The lies rolled off his tongue so effortlessly, each word carefully calculated to paint me as the villain in a story where I had been nothing but the victim. I watched the judge's face, searching for any sign that she could see through his performance. But her expression remained neutral, professional. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the last 3 months preparing for this moment. Hidden in my purse was a small recording device, and on it was a conversation that would change everything. A conversation where Marcus laid out his real plans for our daughter, plans that had nothing to do with love or stability, and everything to do with revenge and control. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got here. How a kindergarten teacher from suburban Milwaukee became the kind of woman who secretly records conversations and plots legal warfare. My name is Jessica Chen, and 6 months ago I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the wife of Marcus Sullivan, a successful real estate developer who owned half the new construction in our growing suburb. I was the mother of Emma Sullivan, a precocious 3-year-old with her father's dark hair and my stubborn streak. I was a kindergarten teacher at Maple Grove Elementary, where I had worked for 7 years, and where everyone knew me as the teacher who stayed late to help struggling students and who never missed a school function. I lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial on Elmwood Drive, complete with a white picket fence and a garden that I tended every weekend. I drove a sensible Honda Civic, shopped at Target, and had a standing appointment every 6 weeks with my stylist Maria to touch up my highlights. I thought I was living the American dream, or at least my version of it. I had married my college sweetheart, built a career I loved, and was raising a daughter who was the center of my universe. Sure, Marcus and I had our problems. What couple didn't? He worked long hours, often coming home after Emma was already asleep. He traveled frequently for business, sometimes for weeks at a time. When he was home, he was often distracted, constantly checking his phone or talking about deals and properties and profit margins that I didn't understand, and, if I'm being honest, didn't care to understand. But I told myself that this was normal, that this was what marriage looked like when you were building something together. Marcus was providing for us, creating a future for Emma that would give her every opportunity I never had. I had grown up in a small apartment above my parents' Chinese restaurant, where money was always tight, and college was a luxury I had to finance entirely through scholarships and student loans. Marcus came from money, real money, the kind where summers were spent at the family lake house and Christmas meant ski trips to Aspen. When we met at the University of Wisconsin, I was immediately swept up in his world of confidence and possibilities. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Tall and handsome, with an easy smile and the kind of natural charisma that made everyone want to be around him. He was pre-law then, already talking about taking over his father's business empire, already making plans for a future that seemed bright and certain. I was an education major, quiet and studious, the kind of girl who spent Friday nights in the library instead of at fraternity parties. I still don't know what he saw in me back then, why someone like Marcus Sullivan would notice someone like me. Our first date was to a hockey game, and I remember feeling so out of place among his friends with their expensive clothes and casual mentions of spring break trips to Europe. But Marcus never made me feel small or inferior. He explained the rules of hockey patiently, bought me a team sweatshirt when I complained about being cold, and walked me home afterwards even though his apartment was in the opposite direction. For 3 years, he made me feel like the most important person in his world. The proposal came during our senior year, right before graduation. It was everything I had dreamed of, a romantic dinner at the fanciest restaurant in Madison, followed by a walk through the campus where we had met. He got down on one knee by the library where I had spent so many hours studying, and when he opened that little blue box, I didn't hesitate for a second. The ring was beautiful, a classic solitaire that caught the light from the street lamps, and when I said yes, I meant it with every fiber of my being. We had a small wedding the following summer, just family and close friends at the country club, where Marcus's parents were members. I felt like a princess in my dress, which had been his mother's suggestion and which cost more than my parents made in 3 months. Marcus looked so handsome in his tuxedo, and when we danced to our song At Last by Etta James, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. We honeymooned in Italy, 2 weeks of museums and restaurants and hotel rooms with views of the Mediterranean. It was perfect, or at least it felt perfect at the time. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, as everyone said it would be. Marcus started working for his father's company immediately after graduation, and the hours were brutal. He was trying to prove himself, to show that he deserved his position based on merit and not just his last name. I understood, or at least I tried to. I had gotten a job teaching kindergarten at Maple Grove Elementary, and I loved it immediately. There was something magical about working with 5- and 6-year-olds, about being there for those crucial moments when reading suddenly clicked, or when a shy child finally made a friend. Marcus and I settled into a routine. He would leave for work before I woke up, and I would be asleep when he came home. Weekends were for catching up, for grocery shopping and laundry and all the mundane tasks of building a life together. We talked about having children, about buying a house, about all the things we wanted to accomplish together. When I got pregnant 3 years later, we were both over the moon. Emma's birth was the happiest day of my life. After 22 hours of labor, she finally arrived, all 6 pounds and 4 ounces of her, with a cry that could wake the dead and the most beautiful face I had ever seen. Marcus cried when he held her for the first time, actual tears streaming down his face as he whispered promises about being the best father in the world. In that moment, I believed him completely. The first few months were difficult, as they are for any new parents. Emma was colicky and rarely slept for more than 2 hours at a time. I was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, trying to balance a demanding baby with a demanding job. Marcus helped when he could, but his work schedule hadn't changed, and most of the nighttime duties fell to me. I didn't mind, not really. Every time Emma smiled at me or reached for my face with her tiny fingers, I felt a surge of love so intense it was almost painful. When Emma turned 1, we bought the house on Elmwood Drive. It was Marcus's choice, in a neighborhood where all his colleagues lived, with the right schools and the right zip code. It was beautiful, I had to admit, with hardwood floors and granite countertops, and a backyard perfect for a swing set. The mortgage was more than I was comfortable with, especially on a teacher's salary, but Marcus assured me that we could afford it, that his income was only going to grow. For the next 2 years, our life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Emma thrived in her new environment, making friends with the neighbor children and developing into a confident, curious little girl. I loved watching her discover the world, loved answering her endless questions and reading her favorite books over and over again. Marcus seemed happy too, or at least content. His business was doing well, he had been promoted to vice president, and we were talking about having another baby. Looking back now, I can see the signs that I missed at the time. The way Marcus would sometimes look at me when he thought I wasn't watching, an expression I couldn't quite read. The way he started working even later, coming home after 10 o'clock most nights. The way he became impatient with Emma's normal toddler behavior, snapping at her when she was too loud or too messy. The way he stopped asking about my day or showing interest in the stories I would tell about my students. I attributed these changes to stress, to the pressures of his job and the responsibility of providing for a family. When he started traveling more frequently, sometimes for weeks at a time, I told myself it was temporary, that once he proved himself, he would be able to delegate more. When he stopped initiating conversations or showing affection, I convinced myself that this was just what marriage looked like after a few years, that the initial passion inevitably cooled into something more stable and practical. I threw myself into my work and into raising Emma, finding fulfillment in the small moments of joy that came with both. My students loved me, and their parents often requested me specifically for their children. Emma was developing into a bright, funny little girl who could recite entire books from memory, and who had strong opinions about everything from her breakfast cereal to her bedtime stories. I was busy, fulfilled in many ways, and if there was a growing emptiness in my marriage, I pushed it down and focused on the positives. The first crack in my carefully constructed denial came on a Tuesday evening in February. Marcus was supposed to be in Chicago for a week-long conference, something about new development opportunities in the Midwest. Emma had been particularly difficult that day, fighting me on everything from getting dressed to eating her dinner, and I was exhausted. I had just gotten her down for the night when my phone rang. It was Sarah, my best friend from college, calling from a bar in downtown Chicago where she was celebrating a promotion. She was a little drunk and very excited, and she was calling to tell me about all the fun she was having when she stopped mid-sentence. "Wait," she said, her voice suddenly confused. "Jessica, didn't you say Marcus was in Chicago this week?" My stomach dropped, but I tried to keep my voice casual. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yes, he's at a conference. Why? Because I think I just saw him walk into the bar. With a woman. A young blonde woman. The phone felt heavy in my hand, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Sarah was still talking, but her words sounded far away, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. Finally, I managed to say, "Are you sure it was him?" "Pretty sure. Same height, same hair, same way of carrying himself. And Jessica, they were holding hands." I ended the call quickly, making some excuse about Emma waking up, and sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a business dinner. Maybe the woman was a client or a colleague. Maybe Sarah had been mistaken. Maybe it wasn't Marcus at all. I called his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I called the hotel where he was supposed to be staying, but when I asked to be connected to his room, they told me they had no guests by that name. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every possible explanation, trying to convince myself that there was an innocent reason for what Sarah had seen. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew the truth. I had known it for months, maybe even years, but I had been too afraid to face it. Marcus came home the following Friday evening as if nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek, asked about Emma, and started telling me about the conference, about the contacts he had made and the deals he was working on. I listened, nodding at the appropriate moments, while inside I was screaming. When he went upstairs to shower, I checked his phone, something I had never done before in our entire relationship. The text messages told the whole story. Dozens of them, to someone named Melissa, messages that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Messages about meeting times and hotel rooms, messages that were intimate and affectionate in a way that Marcus hadn't been with me in years. I scrolled through months of communications, each one feeling like a knife to my heart. But it was the most recent conversation that really destroyed me. Messages from just 2 days earlier, while he was supposedly in Chicago for business. Melissa was complaining about having to be secretive, about feeling like she was living in the shadows. Marcus's response was what broke me. "Just be patient. The divorce will be final soon, and then we can be together properly. I just need to figure out the custody situation with Emma first." Divorce. He was planning to divorce me, and he hadn't said a word. He was planning to take Emma away from me, and he was discussing it with his mistress like it was a business transaction. I sat on our bathroom floor, his phone in my shaking hands, and felt my entire world collapse around me. The next few weeks passed in a blur of numbness and pretending. I went through the motions of my normal life, teaching my classes, taking care of Emma, making dinner for a husband who was planning to leave me. Every night, Marcus would come home and act like the devoted father and husband, reading Emma bedtime stories and asking about my day. Every night, I would smile and respond normally while inside I was planning my next move, because I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait for Marcus to blindside me with divorce papers. I couldn't let him paint me as an unfit mother while he rode off into the sunset with his young girlfriend. I needed to protect myself and, more importantly, I needed to protect Emma. I started documenting everything. Every time Marcus missed a school event or came home late, I wrote it down. Every time he lost his temper with Emma or ignored her completely while scrolling through his phone, I made a note. I started taking pictures of his credit card statements, which showed charges at restaurants and hotels that didn't match his supposed business travel. I created a timeline of his absences, his lies, his gradual withdrawal from our family. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Marcus was charming and successful and had resources I couldn't match. His family had money and influence, and they had never particularly liked me anyway. His mother had made it clear from the beginning that she thought Marcus could do better, that he had settled for someone beneath his social status. If it came down to a custody battle, I knew I would be fighting an uphill battle. That's when I decided to start recording our conversations. It started small, just using the voice memo app on my phone during our increasingly tense discussions about money and Emma's care. Marcus had become more critical of me in recent weeks, more openly dismissive of my opinions and my contributions to our household. He would make comments about my job, about how little I made compared to him, about how I was holding him back from reaching his full potential. These recordings weren't particularly damaging, but they showed a pattern of disrespect and emotional manipulation. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later, when Marcus received a phone call that he thought I couldn't hear. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner while Emma played in the living room. Marcus was in his home office, supposedly working, when his phone rang. I could hear his voice through the thin walls, and something about his tone made me stop what I was doing and listen. He was talking to someone about me, about our marriage, about his plans for the future. I crept closer to the door, my heart pounding, and pulled out my phone to start recording. What I captured over the next 20 minutes was devastating. Marcus was talking to his lawyer, discussing strategy for the divorce he was planning to file. But it wasn't just about ending our marriage. He was talking about how to get full custody of Emma, how to prove that I was an unfit mother who couldn't provide the stability and resources that a child needed. He talked about my modest income, about my emotional state since discovering his affair, about how he could paint me as unstable and unreliable. But the worst part, the part that made my blood run cold, was when he started talking about what would happen after the divorce. He didn't want Emma full-time, he admitted. The custody battle was about punishing me, about making sure I knew who had the real power in our relationship. Once he had legal custody, he planned to send Emma to boarding school as soon as she was old enough, maybe even before. He wanted to be free to start his new life with Melissa, unencumbered by the responsibilities of day-to-day parenting. "The kid will be fine," I heard him say, his voice casual and dismissive. "Kids are resilient. And it will teach Jessica a lesson about trying to take me for everything I'm worth. She'll get limited visitation, maybe weekends, and she'll have to live with the fact that she lost her daughter because she wasn't good enough." I stood there in my kitchen, listening to the man I had once loved discuss our daughter like she was a chess piece in a game I didn't know we were playing. Emma, who worshipped her father and who had no idea that he saw her as nothing more than a weapon to use against me. Emma, who was 3 years old and who deserved parents who would put her needs first, not adults who would use her as a pawn in their personal war. That night, after Marcus had gone to bed, I sat in Emma's room and watched her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing around her. I made a promise to her in that moment, a promise that I would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant becoming someone I never thought I could be. The next morning, I called in sick to work and made an appointment with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Catherine Rodriguez, the best family law attorney in the state, known for her aggressive tactics and her high success rate in custody cases. Her retainer fee was more than I made in 3 months, but I didn't care. I emptied my savings account, cashed in the small inheritance my grandmother had left me, and prepared for war. Catherine listened to my story without judgment, taking notes and asking pointed questions about Marcus's behavior and our financial situation. When I played her the recording of his conversation with his lawyer, her eyebrows raised slightly, the first show of emotion she had displayed. "This is good," she said simply. "This is very good. But we need more. We need to build a case that shows a pattern of neglect and manipulation. We need to document everything, and we need to be smart about how we proceed." Over the next 2 months, I became someone I didn't recognize. I documented every interaction with Marcus, recorded every conversation that might be relevant to a custody case. I hired a private investigator to follow him and Melissa, gathering evidence of their relationship and his neglect of his family responsibilities. I researched Marcus's business dealings and discovered several questionable practices that could impact his reputation and his ability to provide for Emma. The hardest part was pretending that everything was normal, continuing to play the role of the oblivious wife while I gathered ammunition for the battle I knew was coming. Marcus had no idea that I knew about his plans, and I intended to keep it that way until the moment was right to strike. That moment came on a Thursday morning in May. I was getting Emma ready for school when Marcus announced, almost casually, that he wanted to talk that evening about some changes to our living situation. He didn't use the word divorce, but we both knew what he was really saying. He had finally decided it was time to put his plan into action. I nodded and smiled, telling him that of course we could talk, that I was always available to discuss anything that was important to our family. Inside, I was calculating my next moves, running through the strategy that Catherine and I had developed. Marcus thought he was about to ambush me with news that would destroy my world. He had no idea that I had been preparing for this moment for months. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Marcus and I sat in our living room for what I knew would be the last time as husband and wife. He started with the usual platitudes about how we had grown apart, about how we wanted different things, about how sometimes people just weren't compatible in the long term. I listened and nodded, playing my part perfectly. Then he got to the real point. He wanted a divorce, he said, and he thought it would be best for Emma if she lived with him full-time. He could provide better for her, he argued, give her opportunities that I couldn't afford on a teacher's salary. He painted himself as the selfless parent making a difficult decision for the good of our child, while implying that I was selfish for wanting to hold on to a marriage that wasn't working. I let him finish his speech before I responded. Then I looked him in the eye and said the words I had been practicing for weeks. I think you're right, Marcus. I think we should get divorced. And I think we should let a judge decide what's best for Emma. The surprise on his face was almost worth everything I had been through. He had expected tears, begging, maybe even threats. He hadn't expected calm agreement and a willingness to fight. As I watched his expression change from confidence to confusion to concern, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The game was on, and for the first time in months I felt like I had a chance to win. But winning would require me to become someone I had never been before. It would require me to be strategic and ruthless, and willing to expose every ugly truth about the man I had once loved. It would require me to use weapons I had never wanted to possess, and to fight a battle I had never wanted to fight. As I sat there looking at Marcus, seeing him clearly for the first time in years, I realized that the woman who had married him was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and far more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. Someone who had spent months preparing for this exact moment, gathering evidence and building alliances, and learning the rules of a game she had never wanted to play. The custody hearing was still 3 months away, but the real battle was just beginning. And as I excused myself to go check on Emma one more time before bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not hope for reconciliation or forgiveness, but hope for justice. Hope that the truth would finally come to light, and that the daughter I loved more than life itself would be protected from the man who saw her as nothing more than a pawn in his selfish games. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic as he handed me the thick manila envelope. Emma was eating her breakfast, chattering about the art project she was going to work on at preschool, completely oblivious to the fact that her world was about to be turned upside down. I signed for the papers with steady hands, thanked the courier politely, and waited until I heard his car pull away before I allowed myself to look at what Marcus had done. The petition for divorce was exactly what Catherine had predicted it would be. Marcus was asking for full physical custody of Emma, claiming that I was emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible. He painted himself as the primary caregiver, despite the fact that he had missed more school events and bedtime stories than he had attended. The financial disclosures were particularly insulting, designed to make it look like I contributed nothing to our household beyond my modest teaching salary. but it was the character assassination that really took my breath away. According to the documents, I was prone to emotional outbursts that frightened Emma. I was neglectful of her basic needs, often leaving her with babysitters while I pursued my own interests. I was financially dependent and had no realistic plan for supporting myself, let alone a child, after the divorce. Every accusation was carefully crafted to hit exactly where it would hurt most, designed to make me look like the kind of mother who would put her own needs above her child's welfare. I read through the entire document twice, my anger building with each lie, each twisted version of events that painted Marcus as the devoted father, and me as the selfish, unstable mother. When I finished, I carefully placed the papers back in the envelope and called Catherine's office. Her assistant put me through immediately, and I could hear the concern in her voice when I explained what had arrived. "We expected this," Catherine said, though I could hear her shuffling papers in the background. "His strategy is to go on the offensive immediately, to set the narrative before we have a chance to respond. But remember, Jessica, we have ammunition he doesn't know about. Let him think he has the upper hand for now." That afternoon, after dropping Emma off at preschool, I drove to Catherine's office for what would be the first of many strategy sessions. Her office was on the 20th floor of a downtown Milwaukee high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lake Michigan. Catherine herself was nothing like what I had expected when I first Googled aggressive family law attorney. She was petite and elegant, probably in her early 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. But when she spoke, there was steel in her voice that left no doubt about why she had such a formidable reputation. She had been practicing family law for over 20 years, she told me, and she had seen every dirty trick in the book. Marcus's petition was standard for high-conflict custody cases, designed to shock and intimidate me into accepting a settlement that would give him everything he wanted. The key, Catherine explained, spreading Marcus's petition across her conference table, is to show the court who Marcus really is when he thinks no one is watching. "These recordings you've made are excellent, but we need more. We need to build a comprehensive picture of a man who sees his daughter as a possession rather than a person." Over the next hour, Catherine outlined her strategy. We would respond to Marcus's petition with our own motion for primary custody, backed by evidence of his neglect and manipulation. We would use the recordings I had made, but we would also need testimony from witnesses who could speak to Marcus's character and his relationship with Emma. We would need to show that his sudden interest in full custody was motivated not by love for his daughter, but by a desire to control and punish me. "The affair is useful," Catherine said, making notes on a legal pad, "but infidelity alone won't win us a custody case. We need to show a pattern of behavior that demonstrates he's not acting in Emma's best interests. The fact that he's planning to send her to boarding school as soon as possible is perfect, but we need more evidence of his long-term intentions." I left Catherine's office with a list of tasks that felt overwhelming. I needed to gather financial records that would show Marcus's spending on his affair while neglecting Emma's needs. I needed to compile a list of witnesses who could testify to his character and his parenting. Most importantly, I needed to continue documenting his behavior, while appearing to be the cooperative co-parent who was putting Emma's needs first. The hardest part was going home and pretending that everything was normal. Marcus had moved into the guest bedroom, claiming he needed space to think about our future, but he was still living in the house while the divorce proceedings played out. Every morning, we went through the motions of a civilized separation, discussing Emma's schedule and household responsibilities as if we were roommates, rather than two people locked in a battle for our daughter's future. Marcus seemed pleased with himself in those early days after filing the divorce papers. He would come home from work with a spring in his step, humming under his breath as he played with Emma before dinner. He was performing the role of the devoted father, I realized, putting on a show for anyone who might be watching. But I was watching too, and I was documenting everything. The private investigator Catherine had recommended, a former police detective named David Kim, had been following Marcus for 3 weeks and had already provided some interesting information. Marcus wasn't just having an affair with Melissa. He was financing an entire lifestyle for her. The downtown apartment, the expensive dinners, the weekend trips to Chicago and Minneapolis, All of it was being paid for with money that should have been going toward Emma's college fund. More damaging was the evidence of Marcus's priorities during his supposed business trips. David had photographs of Marcus and Melissa at restaurants and hotels, time-stamped on days when Emma had important events that Marcus had claimed he couldn't attend due to work commitments. The preschool graduation that he had missed for a crucial client meeting had actually been spent at a spa resort with his girlfriend. The parent-teacher conference that he had been too busy to attend had coincided with a long weekend in Door County. But the most valuable intelligence came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, who cleaned the office building where Marcus worked, had been watching his late-night activities with growing suspicion. She had seen him with different women over the years, had overheard phone conversations that made her uncomfortable, and had witnessed behavior that didn't match his public image as a family man. Maria had a daughter Emma's age, and when David approached her with questions about Marcus's character, she was more than willing to share what she had observed. She had heard him on the phone multiple times, discussing plans that involved sending Emma away to school and starting fresh with his new girlfriend. She had seen him throw away family photos and personal items that suggested he was already mentally checked out of his role as a father. Most importantly, Maria had been working late one evening when Marcus had brought Melissa to his office for what they clearly thought was a private conversation. She had overheard them discussing their wedding plans, their honeymoon destinations, and their shared vision of a child-free lifestyle. Marcus had laughed when Melissa worried about Emma's reaction to their relationship, telling her not to worry because the kid would adjust quickly to boarding school and would probably prefer it anyway. This information was devastating, but Catherine warned me that we had to be careful about how we used it. Hearsay testimony had limited value in court, and we needed to corroborate Maria's observations with other evidence. That's when I realized I needed to become more proactive in gathering information, even if it meant taking risks that the old Jessica would never have contemplated. I started by becoming more social, accepting invitations to neighborhood events and school functions where I might encounter people who knew Marcus professionally. At a charity golf tournament that his company sponsored, I struck up conversations with his colleagues and clients, subtly probing for information about his work habits and his commitment to family responsibilities. What I discovered was that Marcus's reputation in the business community was already starting to suffer. His frequent absences and distracted behavior hadn't gone unnoticed, and there were rumors about his personal life that were beginning to affect his professional relationships. One of his longtime clients, an elderly woman named Dorothy Chen who was developing a retirement community, pulled me aside at the tournament and expressed her concerns about Marcus's recent performance. "He used to be so attentive to detail," Dorothy confided, sipping her wine as we watched the golfers on the 18th green. "But lately he seems distracted, like his mind is somewhere else. Last week he missed an important deadline that could have cost us thousands in penalties. When I asked him about it, he blamed his assistant, but I know that's not true. His assistant called me personally to apologize for Marcus's oversight." This conversation gave me an idea. If Marcus's work performance was declining due to his personal distractions, there might be documentation of that decline in his employment records. Catherine agreed that this could be valuable evidence, but obtaining those records would require a subpoena and could tip Marcus off to the scope of our investigation. Instead, we decided to focus on building our case through witness testimony and continued documentation of Marcus's behavior. I began keeping a detailed journal of every interaction between Marcus and Emma, noting when he seemed engaged and when he appeared distracted or impatient. The pattern that emerged was disturbing but not surprising. Marcus was most attentive to Emma when other people were around to witness his parenting, but when it was just the three of us at home, he often ignored her completely. One evening, while Marcus was supposedly working late, I received a call from Emma's preschool teacher, Mrs. Patterson. Emma had been having nightmares, she told me, and had been acting out in class. When Mrs. Patterson had asked Emma about what was troubling her, Emma had said that Daddy didn't live in their house anymore, and that he was always angry when Mommy tried to talk to him. This conversation broke my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve. Emma was already being affected by the tension in our house, by the breakdown of her parents' relationship, and the uncertainty about her future. I made an appointment with a child psychologist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in helping children cope with divorce and custody disputes. Dr. Mitchell was everything I hoped she would be: warm, patient, and clearly devoted to helping children navigate difficult family situations. She explained that Emma's behavior was completely normal for a child whose parents were divorcing, but that it was crucial to minimize the disruption to her routine and to avoid exposing her to conflict between her parents. Children Emma's age don't understand the complexities of adult relationships, Dr. Mitchell explained during our first session. They tend to blame themselves for their parents' problems, and they need constant reassurance that they are loved and that their needs will be met regardless of what happens between mom and dad. This advice guided my behavior over the next several weeks. While Marcus continued to play games and make veiled threats about the custody battle, I focused on being the most stable, consistent presence in Emma's life. I maintained her normal routine, continued to read her favorite bedtime stories, and made sure she felt secure and loved despite the chaos swirling around her. But I also continued my investigation, gathering evidence that would support our custody case. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Marcus's own mother, Helen Sullivan. Helen had never particularly liked me, but she loved Emma fiercely, and she was beginning to have concerns about Marcus's recent behavior. Helen called me on a Thursday evening in June, her voice strained and worried. She had been trying to reach Marcus for 3 days, she said, but he hadn't returned her calls. She was supposed to take Emma for a weekend visit, something she did once a month, but Marcus had forgotten to confirm the plans and hadn't answered his phone when she tried to remind him. "This isn't like him," Helen said, and I could hear the genuine concern in her voice. "Marcus has always been responsible about Emma's schedule. Even during his busiest work periods, he's never forgotten about her time with me. Something's wrong, Jessica. I'm worried about what's going on with him." I could have used this opportunity to share my concerns about Marcus's priorities and behavior, but I held back. Instead, I assured Helen that Marcus was probably just overwhelmed with work and suggested that she call him at his office the next day. But privately, I made a note of this conversation and added it to the growing file of evidence that showed Marcus's declining attention to Emma's needs. The next day, I received a call from Marcus that confirmed Helen's concerns. He was irritated and defensive, accusing me of manipulating his mother and trying to turn his family against him. He had forgotten about Emma's planned visit with Helen, he admitted, because he had been dealing with important business matters that required his full attention. "You're trying to make me look bad," he accused, his voice tight with anger. "You're documenting every little mistake I make and building a case against me." "Well, two can play that game, Jessica. I'm watching you, too, and I'm going to make sure the court knows exactly what kind of mother you really are." This threat should have frightened me, but instead, it energized me. Marcus was starting to feel the pressure, starting to realize that I wasn't going to be the passive victim he had expected. His mask of the devoted father was beginning to slip, and I needed to be ready to capture every moment when his true priorities became visible. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Emma had developed a fever on a Friday afternoon, and I had taken her to the pediatrician as a precaution. It turned out to be just a minor virus, but Emma was miserable and clingy, wanting nothing more than to curl up in my lap and watch cartoons. When Marcus came home from work, I expected him to show concern for his sick daughter, maybe offer to help with her care. Instead, he was annoyed that Emma's illness might interfere with his weekend plans. He had tickets to a baseball game with Melissa, he told me, and he couldn't cancel because they were entertaining important clients. When I suggested that maybe his sick daughter should take priority over a baseball game, he accused me of being manipulative and trying to use Emma to control his schedule. "She has a little cold, Jessica," he said dismissively, not even bothering to check Emma's temperature or ask how she was feeling. "She'll be fine with you. That's what mothers are for, right?" I recorded this entire conversation, along with several others over the next few days, where Marcus showed similar indifference to Emma's needs. When Emma asked why Daddy couldn't stay home and take care of her like Mommy did, Marcus told her that Daddy had important work to do, and that she needed to understand that some things were more important than spending time at home. These recordings were devastating evidence of Marcus's priorities, but they were also heartbreaking to listen to. I could hear the confusion and hurt in Emma's voice as she tried to understand why her father didn't want to spend time with her when she wasn't feeling well. I could hear Marcus's impatience and dismissiveness, his complete lack of empathy for a sick 3-year-old who just wanted her daddy's attention. Catherine was pleased with the evidence we were gathering, but she warned me that Marcus's legal team would try to discredit the recordings and paint me as a vindictive ex-wife who was manipulating the situation. We needed to be prepared for character attacks and accusations that I was coaching Emma or putting words in her mouth. The good news, Catherine said during one of our weekly strategy meetings, is that children Emma's age are terrible liars. Their emotions and reactions are genuine, and any experienced family court judge will be able to see through attempts at manipulation. But we need to be careful not to put Emma in the middle of this any more than necessary. This advice weighed heavily on my mind as the custody evaluation process began. The court had appointed Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist with extensive experience in custody cases, to conduct interviews with both parents and with Emma herself. The evaluation would include home visits, psychological testing, and interviews with teachers and other people who interacted with Emma regularly. I was nervous about the evaluation, but I was also confident that the truth would speak for itself. Emma was a happy, well-adjusted child who had strong bonds with both parents, but who clearly saw me as her primary caregiver and source of emotional support. Her preschool teachers consistently described her as secure and confident, traits that typically reflected a stable home environment. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed to view the custody evaluation as another business negotiation, something he could win through charm and strategic positioning. He hired his own child psychologist to provide a competing evaluation, and he began coaching Emma on what to say during her interviews, telling her that she needed to tell the nice doctor how much she loved spending time with Daddy and how much fun they had together. This coaching backfired spectacularly. Emma, who had never been good at keeping secrets, immediately told me about Daddy's instructions and asked me what she should say to the doctor. I explained to her, as gently as I could, that she should just tell the truth about her feelings and her daily life, and that there were no right or wrong answers to the doctor's questions. Dr. Walsh's interviews with Emma were revealing in ways that Marcus clearly hadn't anticipated. Emma spoke freely about her daily routine, about how Mommy helped her get dressed in the morning and read her stories at night, about how Daddy was often busy with work and didn't have time to play. When Dr. Walsh asked Emma about her favorite activities with each parent, Emma struggled to come up with specific examples involving Marcus, but could easily describe elaborate games and adventures with me. Most damaging was Emma's response when Dr. Walsh asked her about where she felt safest and most comfortable. Without hesitation, Emma said that she felt safest with Mommy, because Mommy was always there when she needed her and always knew how to make her feel better when she was scared or sad. The home visits were equally revealing. When Dr. Walsh visited our house, she found Emma's room exactly as it should be for a 3-year-old, filled with toys and books, decorated with her artwork, clearly the space of a child who was loved and nurtured. Emma was comfortable and relaxed, showing Dr. Walsh her favorite dolls and books, curling up next to me on the couch as we talked. Marcus's attempt to create a similar environment in his temporary apartment fell flat. The space felt sterile and unwelcoming, more like a hotel room than a home. There were a few toys scattered around, clearly purchased recently for the visit, but Emma seemed uncomfortable and uncertain in the unfamiliar environment. When Dr. Walsh asked Emma to show her around the apartment, Emma clung to Marcus's hand and kept looking toward the door, as if she wanted to leave. But the most revealing moment came when Dr. Walsh asked Emma to draw a picture of her family. Emma's drawing showed herself holding hands with me, with Marcus standing off to the side talking on his phone. When Dr. Walsh asked Emma to explain her picture, Emma said matter-of-factly that this was how her family looked most of the time. These evaluation sessions gave me hope, but Catherine warned me not to become overconfident. Marcus's legal team was aggressive and well-funded, and they would use every trick in the book to discredit our case. They had already begun attacking my character, suggesting that I was an overprotective mother who was interfering with Emma's relationship with her father. Their strategy became clear during my deposition, a grueling 6-hour session, where Marcus's attorney Robert Harrison tried to paint me as emotionally unstable and vindictive. He questioned every decision I had made regarding Emma's care, suggesting that my insistence on maintaining routines was actually controlling behavior. He implied that my documentation of Marcus's neglect was evidence of an obsessive personality that could be harmful to Emma's development. Most insulting were his questions about my career and my financial prospects after the divorce. Harrison suggested that my attachment to Emma was partially motivated by financial concerns, that I saw child support as a way to maintain my lifestyle without having to improve my earning potential. He painted my teaching career as a part-time hobby rather than a meaningful profession, and he questioned my ability to provide for Emma's future educational and extracurricular needs. I answered every question calmly and honestly, refusing to let Harrison's tactics rattle me. Yes, I documented Marcus's behavior, but only because I was concerned about Emma's welfare and wanted to ensure that the court had accurate information about her daily life. Yes, I would need child support to maintain Emma's current standard of living, but my primary concern was her emotional well-being, not my financial security. When Harrison played selected portions of my recordings, trying to make them sound like evidence of my vindictive nature, I explained the context of each conversation and my reasons for documenting them. I wasn't trying to trap Marcus, I explained. I was trying to protect Emma from a father who saw her as a possession rather than a person. The deposition was exhausting, but I felt good about my performance. Harrison had tried to break me down, to make me appear emotional and irrational, but I had remained calm and focused throughout the questioning. Catherine seemed pleased with how I had handled the pressure, and she assured me that my testimony would play well with a judge who was looking for evidence of which parent was truly acting in Emma's best interests. Marcus's deposition, which took place the following week, was a very different affair. He was charming and confident, presenting himself as the successful businessman who was being unfairly attacked by a bitter ex-wife. He denied all allegations of neglect, claiming that I was twisting innocent situations to make him look bad. He painted himself as the victim of my vindictive behavior, suggesting that I was using Emma as a weapon in our divorce. But Marcus made several critical mistakes during his testimony. When questioned about his future plans for Emma, he was vague and evasive, unable to provide specific details about how he would balance his demanding career with single parenthood. When pressed about his relationship with Melissa and how she would fit into Emma's life, he became defensive and angry, accusing Catherine of asking irrelevant questions. Most damaging was his response when Catherine played the recording of his conversation about sending Emma to boarding school. Marcus tried to claim that he had been speaking hypothetically, that he was simply exploring all options for Emma's education. But his tone in the recording was casual and matter-of-fact, clearly indicating that this was a concrete plan rather than a theoretical discussion. Catherine also presented evidence of Marcus's financial priorities, showing how much money he had spent on his affair while claiming that he couldn't afford to increase his contributions to Emma's college fund. The contrast was stark. Thousands of dollars spent on dinners and trips with Melissa, while Emma's preschool tuition payments were often late and her clothing needs were dismissed as unnecessary expenses. By the end of Marcus's deposition, his carefully constructed image was beginning to crumble. He was revealed as a man who talked a good game about being a devoted father, but whose actions consistently showed that Emma was not his priority. His anger and defensiveness when challenged only reinforced the impression that he was more concerned with winning than with what was actually best for his daughter. As we prepared for the actual custody hearing, I felt a mixture of confidence and terror. We had built a strong case, with evidence that clearly showed Marcus's neglect and his inappropriate priorities. But I also knew that family court was unpredictable, and that judges sometimes made decisions that seemed to contradict the evidence. The night before the hearing, I sat in Emma's room watching her sleep, thinking about how much our lives had changed in just a few months. 6 months ago, I had been the naive wife who believed in happy endings and trusted that love would be enough to hold our family together. Now I was a single mother preparing to fight for custody of my daughter, armed with recordings and evidence that would expose the man I had once loved as someone capable of using his own child as a pawn in his personal games. But as I looked at Emma's peaceful face, I knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom and play the recording that would change everything. The conversation that would show the judge exactly what kind of father Marcus really was. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt certain that justice would prevail. The morning of the custody hearing arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that makes Milwaukee summers unbearable. I had barely slept, my mind racing through every possible scenario, every argument Catherine and I had prepared, every piece of evidence we had compiled over the past 4 months. Emma was staying with my parents for the day, blissfully unaware that her future was being decided in a sterile courtroom downtown. I had kissed her goodbye that morning, promising her ice cream when I picked her up later, my heart breaking at her innocent trust that everything would work out fine. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror for the third time, adjusting the navy blue suit Catherine had helped me choose. Professional but not intimidating, she had said. Maternal but not weak. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the broken wife who had discovered Marcus's betrayal 6 months earlier. This woman had steel in her spine and fire in her eyes, and she was ready for war. Catherine met me at the courthouse steps, her silver hair gleaming in the harsh morning sun. She carried a leather briefcase that I knew contained every piece of damning evidence we had gathered against Marcus, including the recordings that would hopefully end this battle once and for all. Her confidence was infectious, and as we walked through the metal detectors and past the security guards, I felt my nervousness transform into determination. The family courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with wood paneling that had seen better days and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in an unflattering yellow glow. Judge Patricia Martinez presided from behind an imposing bench, her dark hair pulled back severely and her expression unreadable. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, Catherine had told me, someone who had seen every dirty trick in the book and who had no patience for games or manipulation. Marcus was already seated at the defendant's table with his attorney Robert Harrison, looking every inch the successful businessman in his expensive charcoal suit. He didn't acknowledge my presence as Catherine and I took our seats, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched tight. For the first time since this ordeal began, Marcus looked worried, and that small sign of vulnerability gave me strength. The proceedings began with Harrison's opening statement, a carefully crafted narrative that painted Marcus as the dedicated father who was being unfairly attacked by his vindictive ex-wife. According to Harrison, I was an emotionally unstable woman who was using our daughter as a weapon in our divorce, making false accusations and manufacturing evidence to support my claims. He portrayed Marcus as the victim of my manipulative behavior, a loving father who simply wanted what was best for Emma. Your Honor, Harrison said, his voice smooth and confident, Mr. Sullivan is a successful businessman who has worked tirelessly to provide for his family. He has never been anything but a devoted father to Emma, and the allegations made by Mrs. Sullivan are nothing more than the bitter attacks of a woman who cannot accept that her marriage has failed. We will show that Mrs. Sullivan has systematically attempted to alienate Emma from her father, recording private conversations and twisting innocent statements to support her false narrative. I listened to Harrison's lies with growing anger, watching him transform Marcus into a sympathetic figure who was being persecuted by his unstable ex-wife. But Catherine had warned me that this would happen, that Marcus's team would try to paint me as the villain in this story. I forced myself to remain calm, to trust in the evidence we had compiled and the truth that would soon be revealed. Catherine's opening statement was a masterclass in controlled fury. She didn't raise her voice or resort to emotional appeals, but her words cut through Harrison's fiction like a surgical blade. She outlined the evidence we would present, the pattern of neglect and manipulation that showed Marcus's true priorities, and the devastating recordings that would reveal his real plans for Emma. Your Honor, Catherine said, her voice steady and clear. This case is about a man who sees his daughter not as a person to be loved and nurtured, but as a possession to be used in his personal war against his ex-wife. The evidence will show that Mr. Sullivan has consistently prioritized his own desires over Emma's needs, that he has used his financial resources to support an extramarital affair while neglecting his daughter's basic requirements, and that his sudden interest in full custody is motivated not by love, but by a desire for revenge and control. The first day of testimony was a parade of witnesses who painted a picture of Marcus's character and priorities. Dorothy Chen, the elderly client who had expressed concerns about Marcus's declining work performance, testified about his increasing unreliability and distracted behavior. She described missed deadlines and forgotten meetings, all coinciding with the period when Marcus's affair had intensified. Emma's preschool teacher, Mrs. Patterson, testified about the changes she had observed in Emma's behavior and the concerning things Emma had said about her home life. She described a child who was clearly more bonded with her mother, who spoke about daddy being busy and mommy being the one who took care of her when she was sick or scared. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the child psychologist I had consulted, provided expert testimony about the importance of stability and consistency in a young child's life. She explained how disruption and conflict between parents could affect a child's emotional development, and she outlined the warning signs that indicated when a child was being used as a pawn in adult conflicts. But the most powerful testimony came from Maria Santos, the cleaning woman who had witnessed Marcus's late-night activities at his office. Through a translator, Maria described what she had overheard, the conversations about sending Emma to boarding school, and the callous way Marcus had discussed his daughter's future with his mistress. Her testimony was devastating, made more credible by her obvious reluctance to get involved, and her genuine concern for Emma's welfare. Harrison tried his best to discredit Maria's testimony, suggesting that she had misunderstood what she heard, or that she was being coached by my legal team. But Maria's sincerity was evident, and her detailed recollection of specific conversations left little room for doubt about what she had witnessed. Marcus took the stand on the second day, and I watched with fascination as he attempted to rehabilitate his image. He spoke eloquently about his love for Emma, his commitment to being a good father, and his desire to provide her with every opportunity for success. He denied all allegations of neglect, claiming that his work schedule was demanding, but that he always made time for Emma when she needed him. When Harrison asked him about his relationship with Melissa, Marcus admitted to the affair but claimed it was the result of his marital problems, not the cause of them. He portrayed himself as a man who had made mistakes, but who was committed to putting Emma's needs first going forward. He even managed to produce a few tears when discussing how much he missed spending time with his daughter. But Catherine's cross-examination revealed the cracks in Marcus's carefully constructed facade. She methodically went through his calendar, showing how many of Emma's important events he had missed for business trips that had actually been romantic getaways with Melissa. She presented evidence of his spending patterns, the thousands of dollars lavished on his mistress, while Emma's needs were treated as burdensome expenses. Most damaging was Catherine's questioning about Marcus's future plans for Emma. When she asked him directly about his intentions regarding Emma's education and living arrangements, Marcus became evasive and defensive. He claimed that he was exploring all options, that he wanted what was best for Emma, but he couldn't provide specific details about how he would manage single parenthood while maintaining his demanding career. "Mr. Sullivan," Catherine said, her voice deceptively gentle, "isn't it true that you've already made plans to send Emma to boarding school as soon as she's old enough?" "That's not true," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "I've looked into various educational options, but no decisions have been made. And isn't it true that these educational options are designed to allow you to pursue your relationship with Ms. Peterson without the inconvenience of day-to-day parenting responsibilities?" "Absolutely not," Marcus said, his anger beginning to show. "I resent the implication that I see my daughter as an inconvenience. Everything I do is motivated by what's best for Emma." This was the moment Catherine had been building toward, the setup for the devastating evidence we were about to present. She turned to Judge Martinez and announced that she had audio recordings that would demonstrate Mr. Sullivan's true feelings about his parenting responsibilities. The courtroom fell silent as Catherine played the first recording, Marcus's conversation with his lawyer about using Emma as a weapon against me in the divorce proceedings. Marcus's voice filled the room, casual and calculating as he discussed strategy for the custody battle, his primary concern being how to minimize his financial obligations while maximizing his control over me. But it was the second recording that truly destroyed him. The conversation with Melissa, where he had laughed about Emma's adjustment to boarding school and dismissed his daughter's emotional needs as temporary inconveniences. The courtroom was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop, as Marcus's own words revealed him to be exactly what Catherine had claimed, a man who saw his daughter as a possession rather than a person. Marcus's face went pale as he listened to his own voice, the blood draining from his cheeks as he realized how damning the recordings were. Harrison objected frantically, claiming the recordings were illegally obtained and inadmissible, but Judge Martinez allowed them as evidence after Catherine demonstrated that they had been recorded in circumstances where Marcus had no reasonable expectation of privacy. The final blow came when Catherine played the recording of Marcus's conversation about his long-term plans for Emma, His casual dismissal of her emotional needs, and his excitement about starting a new life with Melissa once Emma was safely tucked away at boarding school. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable, the way he spoke about his 3-year-old daughter as if she were a business problem to be solved, rather than a child who needed love and stability. Harrison's redirect examination was a desperate attempt at damage control, but the recordings spoke for themselves. Marcus tried to claim that he had been speaking hypothetically, that his words had been taken out of context, but the casual tone and specific details in the conversations made it clear that these were concrete plans, not theoretical discussions. The custody evaluator, Dr. Walsh, testified on the third day, presenting her findings from months of interviews and observations. Her report was a comprehensive analysis of both parents' relationships with Emma, their parenting capabilities, and their ability to provide for Emma's emotional and physical needs. The findings were devastating for Marcus. Dr. Walsh testified that Emma showed clear signs of being more securely attached to me, that she demonstrated anxiety and uncertainty when discussing her father's role in her life, and that her drawings and play activities consistently portrayed me as the primary caregiver and source of emotional support. Most damning was Dr. Walsh's conclusion that Emma's best interests would be served by maintaining her primary residence with me, with limited supervised visitation for Marcus, until he could demonstrate a genuine commitment to putting Emma's needs before his own desires. In my professional opinion, Dr. Walsh said, her voice clear and authoritative, Emma Sullivan is a well-adjusted child who has formed a secure attachment with her mother. The evidence suggests that Mr. Sullivan's interest in custody is motivated more by a desire to control and punish his ex-wife than by genuine concern for Emma's welfare. I recommend that primary custody be awarded to Mrs. Sullivan, with supervised visitation for Mr. Sullivan until such time as he can demonstrate that he is capable of putting Emma's needs first. Harrison's cross-examination of Dr. Walsh was brutal but ineffective. He tried to suggest that her evaluation was biased, that she had been influenced by my manipulation of the situation, but Dr. Walsh calmly defended her methods and conclusions. She explained that her evaluation was based on standardized psychological assessments, multiple interviews with Emma and both parents, and extensive observation of parent-child interactions. Her conclusions were supported by objective evidence, not subjective impressions. The final witness was Melissa Peterson herself, called by Catherine in a move that surprised everyone, including Harrison. Melissa had been subpoenaed to testify about her relationship with Marcus and her knowledge of his plans for Emma. She appeared reluctant and nervous, clearly uncomfortable with being thrust into the spotlight of the custody battle. Under Catherine's questioning, Melissa admitted to the affair and confirmed many of the details about Marcus's priorities and behavior. She testified that Marcus had told her repeatedly that Emma would be going to boarding school, that he was tired of the responsibilities of parenthood, and that he was looking forward to a life where he could focus on his career and their relationship without the complications of shared custody. Most damaging was Melissa's testimony about Marcus's attitude toward me and his motivations for seeking full custody. She confirmed that Marcus had told her explicitly that the custody battle was about punishment, about making sure I understood the consequences of challenging him. She testified that Marcus had laughed about my financial struggles and had expressed satisfaction at the thought of me losing Emma after, quote, everything she had put him through. Harrison's cross-examination of Melissa was brief and unsuccessful. She had already admitted to her role in the affair, and her testimony about Marcus's statements was specific and credible. When Harrison tried to suggest that she was lying to protect herself, Melissa became defensive and provided even more damaging details about Marcus's character and priorities. The closing arguments were a study in contrasts. Harrison made a last-ditch effort to rehabilitate Marcus's image, arguing that he was a successful man who had made mistakes but who genuinely loved his daughter and wanted what was best for her. He claimed that the recordings were being taken out of context, that Marcus's statements about boarding school were simply explorations of educational options, and that I was a vindictive ex-wife who was using Emma as a weapon in our divorce. But Harrison's arguments fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence Catherine had presented. The recordings spoke for themselves, revealing Marcus's true character and motivations in his own words. The testimony of witnesses like Dr. Walsh and Maria Santos painted a clear picture of a man who prioritized his own desires over his daughter's needs, and the evidence of Marcus's spending patterns showed where his real priorities lay. Catherine's closing argument was a powerful summation of the evidence and a passionate plea for Emma's welfare. She methodically reviewed each piece of evidence, showing how they all pointed to the same conclusion: that Marcus was seeking custody not out of love for Emma, but out of a desire to control and punish me. "Your Honor," Catherine said, her voice ringing with conviction, "this case is ultimately about what is in the best interests of a 3-year-old child. The evidence has shown conclusively that Mr. Sullivan sees Emma not as a daughter to be cherished, but as a pawn to be used in his personal war against his ex-wife." His own words, recorded without his knowledge, reveal his true intentions: to send Emma away to boarding school as soon as possible so that he can pursue his new relationship without the inconvenience of parenting responsibilities. Catherine paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. Mrs. Sullivan, on the other hand, has consistently put Emma's needs first. She has maintained Emma's routines and stability throughout this difficult period. She has sought professional help to ensure Emma's emotional well-being, and she has documented Mr. Sullivan's neglect not out of vindictiveness, but out of genuine concern for her daughter's welfare. The choice before this court is clear: award custody to the parent who sees Emma as a beloved daughter, or to the parent who sees her as a burden to be managed. Judge Martinez took a brief recess before delivering her decision, and those 20 minutes felt like the longest of my life. Catherine and I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, neither of us speaking, both lost in our own thoughts about what the judge might decide. I thought about Emma, probably playing in my parents' backyard, oblivious to the fact that her entire future was being decided in a room full of strangers. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Martinez's expression was grave and professional. She had clearly given careful consideration to all the evidence presented, and when she began to speak, her words were measured and precise. "This court has listened carefully to all testimony and has reviewed all evidence presented in this matter," Judge Martinez began. "The primary consideration in any custody determination must be the best interests of the child, and in this case, that consideration leads to a clear conclusion." My heart pounded as the judge continued, reviewing the key evidence that had influenced her decision. She cited Dr. Walsh's evaluation, the testimony of witnesses who had observed Marcus's behavior, and most importantly, the recordings that had revealed Marcus's true motivations and plans. The evidence presented to this court demonstrates clearly that Mr. Sullivan's interest in obtaining custody of Emma is not motivated by her best interests, but by a desire to control and punish Mrs. Sullivan, Judge Martinez said. Mr. Sullivan's own words, captured in recorded conversations, reveal his intention to send Emma to boarding school at the earliest opportunity, not because such an arrangement would benefit Emma, but because it would allow him to pursue his personal interests without the responsibilities of day-to-day parenting. The judge paused, looking directly at Marcus before continuing. Furthermore, the evidence shows a pattern of neglect and disregard for Emma's emotional needs. Mr. Sullivan has consistently prioritized his business interests and personal relationships over his responsibilities as a father, and his testimony in this proceeding has failed to demonstrate any genuine understanding of what Emma needs from a parent. My eyes filled with tears as Judge Martinez delivered her final decision. Therefore, this court awards primary physical custody of Emma Sullivan to her mother, Jessica Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan will be granted supervised visitation rights to be exercised under the supervision of a court-appointed monitor, pending his completion of parenting classes and psychological evaluation to address his fitness as a parent. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire courtroom, and suddenly it was over. 4 months of preparation, 3 days of testimony, and countless hours of worry and fear, all resolved in a few decisive words from Judge Martinez. Emma would stay with me, safe from Marcus's manipulation and neglect, free to grow up in a home where she was valued for who she was, rather than what she could provide. Marcus sat frozen at the defendant's table, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Harrison was already gathering his papers, clearly eager to escape what had become a complete rout. But I barely noticed them, too, overcome with relief and gratitude to focus on anything except the knowledge that Emma was safe. Catherine hugged me briefly before beginning the practical work of reviewing the custody order and discussing next steps. There would be paperwork to file, visitation schedules to arrange, and ongoing legal matters to resolve. But the most important battle had been won, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. As we left the courthouse, Catherine turned to me with a smile that mixed professional satisfaction with genuine warmth. "You did it, Jessica," she said. "You protected your daughter, and you showed the court who Marcus really is. Emma is lucky to have you as her mother." Walking down the courthouse steps into the bright afternoon sun, I felt like a different person than the woman who had entered that building 3 days earlier. The naive wife who had trusted blindly in love and marriage was gone, replaced by someone stronger and wiser, someone who had learned that sometimes the people we love most are capable of hurting us in ways we never imagined possible. But more importantly, I had learned that I was capable of fighting for what mattered most, of becoming the kind of mother Emma deserved, someone who would protect her fiercely and love her unconditionally. The recording that had seemed like such a violation when I first made it had become the weapon that saved my daughter's future, proof that sometimes the truth really is enough to set you free. The drive to my parents' house to pick up Emma felt like a victory lap, every mile bringing me closer to the moment when I could hold my daughter and tell her that everything was going to be all right. She would stay with me, in the home where she felt safe and loved, with the parent who had never seen her as anything less than a precious gift to be treasured. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, Emma came running out of the house with her arms outstretched, her face bright with the uncomplicated joy that only a 3-year-old can possess. As I swept her up in my arms and spun her around, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair and feeling her small body pressed against mine, I knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. Marcus would have his supervised visits, his opportunity to prove that he could put Emma's needs first, but those visits would be closely monitored by professionals who understood the difference between genuine parenting and mere performance. Emma would be protected from his manipulation and neglect, free to develop her own relationship with her father, without being used as a weapon in his personal wars. That evening, as I tucked Emma into her own bed in her own room, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that seemed too wise for her age and asked, "Mommy, are you happy now?" I smoothed her hair back from her forehead and kissed her goodnight, my heart full of love and gratitude and fierce protectiveness. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "Mommy is very happy now, and you're safe. And that's all that matters." As I turned off the light and closed her bedroom door, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible morning when I first heard Marcus planning my destruction. The woman who had been broken by betrayal had transformed into someone capable of strategic thinking and decisive action. Someone who could navigate the complexities of family court and emerge victorious. But the most important transformation was simpler and more profound. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my own worth and my ability to protect the people I loved. Marcus had tried to destroy me, to paint me as weak and inadequate, but his own words had revealed the truth about who was really unfit to be a parent. The recording that had captured his casual cruelty and calculated manipulation would remain as evidence of what I had overcome, a reminder that sometimes the truth is stranger and more powerful than any fiction. In trying to destroy me, Marcus had provided the very weapon that would ensure Emma's safety and happiness. Justice had been served, not through revenge or retribution, but through the simple power of truth spoken in the right place at the right time. And as I settled into my own bed for the first peaceful night's sleep I had enjoyed in months, I knew that Emma and I would be just fine. The weeks following the custody decision brought a strange kind of peace that I hadn't experienced in almost a year. Emma and I settled into new routines, ones that didn't involve walking on eggshells around Marcus's unpredictable moods, or pretending that everything was normal when our world was falling apart. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I could focus entirely on being a mother without the constant undercurrent of fear about what Marcus might do next. But peace, I was learning, came with its own challenges. The adrenaline that had sustained me through months of preparation and 3 days of intense courtroom drama had faded, leaving me feeling oddly empty and uncertain about what came next. The woman who had orchestrated Marcus's downfall was still there inside me, but she felt like a stranger, someone I had become out of necessity rather than choice. Emma thankfully seemed to be thriving in our new reality. The tension that had marked her behavior during the worst months of our marital breakdown had begun to ease, replaced by the natural confidence of a child who felt secure in her world. She asked about Daddy sometimes, wondering when she would see him again, but without the anxiety that had colored those questions during the custody battle. Marcus's first supervised visit was scheduled for 2 weeks after the court decision, and I found myself dreading it more than Emma seemed to. The court-appointed supervisor, Linda Morrison, was a no-nonsense social worker with 30 years of experience in family services. She had seen every kind of dysfunction imaginable, she assured me during our preliminary meeting, and she would ensure that Emma's emotional safety remained the top priority during these visits. The night before that first visit, I lay awake wondering what Marcus would say to Emma, how he would explain the new reality of their relationship. Would he be bitter and blame me for the restrictions placed on their time together? Would he try to manipulate Emma's emotions to turn her against me? Or would this experience finally force him to confront his own failures as a father and motivate real change? When I dropped Emma off at the supervised visitation center that Saturday morning, my stomach was churning with anxiety. The building was cheerful and child-friendly, designed to feel more like a community center than an institutional setting. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was feeding my daughter to a wolf. Linda greeted us warmly, immediately engaging Emma in conversation about her favorite toys and books, and I watched my daughter's natural sociability override any nervousness she might have felt about the unfamiliar environment. Marcus arrived precisely on time, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes that seemed too deliberate, as if he had studied what other divorced fathers wore to visitation centers. He hugged Emma enthusiastically, and I felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy at how easily she melted into his embrace. Despite everything he had done, everything the recordings had revealed about his true feelings, Emma still loved her father, with the uncomplicated devotion that only a child could offer. I left them there together, Marcus and Emma and Linda, in a cheerfully decorated room filled with toys and books, and drove home to spend 2 hours in my empty house wondering what they were talking about. The silence felt oppressive after months of constant noise and activity, and I found myself cleaning obsessively, scrubbing surfaces that were already spotless just to have something to do with my hands. When I returned to pick up Emma, Linda gave me a brief but reassuring report. The visit had gone well, she said, with Marcus appearing genuinely engaged with Emma's activities and showing appropriate interest in her stories about preschool and her friends. There had been no inappropriate questions about our home life or attempts to gather information that could be used in future legal proceedings. Emma chattered happily about her time with Daddy during the drive home, telling me about the puzzles they had worked on together and the book he had read to her. She seemed completely unaware of the artificial nature of their interaction, the presence of the supervisor, or the fact that this structured visit was vastly different from the casual neglect that had characterized Marcus's parenting during our marriage. Over the following months, these supervised visits became a regular part of our routine. Marcus never missed one, arriving promptly each Saturday morning and staying for the full 2 hours allotted by the court. Linda's reports were consistently positive, describing a father who seemed to be making a genuine effort to connect with his daughter and who showed appropriate boundaries and behavior during their time together. But I remained skeptical of this sudden transformation. The recordings had revealed Marcus's true character too clearly for me to believe that a few parenting classes and court-ordered supervision could fundamentally change who he was. I suspected that he was simply performing for Linda, playing the role of the reformed father while he worked on his appeal of the custody decision. My suspicions were confirmed when Catherine called to inform me that Marcus's legal team had indeed filed an appeal, claiming that the recordings had been improperly admitted as evidence, and that the judge had been biased in her interpretation of the testimony. The appeal would likely take months to work its way through the system, Catherine explained, but she was confident that it would be unsuccessful given the overwhelming evidence that had been presented at trial. Still, the knowledge that Marcus was continuing to fight for custody cast a shadow over our newfound stability. I found myself documenting everything again, keeping detailed records of Emma's behavior after each visit with her father, watching for any signs that he might be attempting to manipulate her emotions or gather information about our daily life. It was during this period of uneasy peace that I began to grapple seriously with the question of who I had become during the custody battle. The woman who had secretly recorded her husband's conversations and hired private investigators to follow him felt like someone from a different life, someone I wasn't entirely sure I recognized or approved of. Had I been justified in those actions, or had I become as manipulative and calculating as Marcus himself? I started seeing Dr. Patricia Webb, a therapist who specialized in helping women navigate the aftermath of high-conflict divorces. Dr. Webb had seen many cases like mine, she assured me, women who had been forced to become warriors in order to protect their children from destructive ex-partners. The transformation was necessary and appropriate, she explained, but it often left women struggling with questions about their own identity and values. "You didn't become a different person," Dr. Webb told me during one of our early sessions. "You became a more complete version of yourself, someone who is capable of protecting what mattered most to you. The fact that you're questioning your actions now shows that your moral compass is still intact." These therapy sessions helped me process the complex emotions that had been building up during the months of legal warfare. I had spent so long focused on gathering evidence and building a case that I hadn't allowed myself to fully grieve the end of my marriage or the loss of the future I had planned with Marcus. The man I had loved and trusted had revealed himself to be someone capable of using our daughter as a weapon, and that betrayal cut deeper than the affair ever could have. But perhaps more difficult to process was my own transformation from victim to victor. I had discovered capabilities within myself that I never knew existed. A capacity for strategic thinking and ruthless determination that felt both empowering and troubling. The quiet kindergarten teacher who had trusted in love and good intentions seemed like someone from another lifetime, and I wasn't entirely sure how to integrate that person with the woman I had become. Emma, meanwhile, continued to flourish in our new environment. Her preschool teachers commented on her increased confidence and improved social skills, and I could see the changes myself in the way she played and interacted with other children. The anxiety that had marked her behavior during the worst months of the custody battle had faded, replaced by the natural exuberance of a child who felt secure in her world. One evening in late fall, as I was helping Emma with a puzzle after dinner, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes and asked a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy live with us anymore?" I had been dreading this question, knowing that it would come eventually, but never feeling prepared to answer it in a way that would be both honest and age-appropriate. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that her father had planned to send her away to boarding school? How do you describe betrayal and manipulation without destroying a child's faith in the adults who are supposed to protect her? I sat down on the floor next to Emma, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups realize that they're not happy living together anymore. Daddy and I decided that we would both be happier living in different houses, but that doesn't change how much we both love you." Emma considered this explanation, her small face scrunched up in concentration. "But I'm happy when we're all together," she said, and I felt my heart break a little at the simple longing in her voice. "I know, honey," I said, pulling her into my lap, "and it's okay to feel sad about that. But sometimes grown-ups have to make decisions that seem sad at first, but that turn out to be better for everyone in the long run." This conversation was the first of many. As Emma began to process the reality of our new family structure, she asked about Daddy's new house, about whether he missed living with us, about whether there was any chance we might all live together again someday. Each question was a small knife to my heart, a reminder of the dreams and plans that had been shattered by Marcus's betrayal. But I was determined to handle these conversations with the honesty and sensitivity that Emma deserved. I refused to badmouth Marcus or poison Emma's relationship with her father, no matter how I felt about him personally. She needed to form her own opinions about their relationship based on his actions, not my interpretations of those actions. The holidays presented new challenges. As we navigated our first Christmas as a divorced family, Marcus requested additional visitation time, wanting Emma to spend Christmas Eve with him and Melissa, and Catherine advised me to be flexible as long as the visits remained supervised. The thought of Emma spending Christmas with the woman who had helped destroy our marriage made me physically ill, but I knew that being seen as unreasonable or vindictive could hurt me in future legal proceedings. Christmas morning was bittersweet. Emma was thrilled with her presence and seemed genuinely happy, but I couldn't shake the sadness of spending the holiday alone with her after years of family traditions that had included Marcus. I found myself thinking about Christmases past, about the man I had thought Marcus was, and the future I had believed we were building together. But as I watched Emma play with her new toys, chattering excitedly about all the fun things we would do together, I realized that we were building something new and potentially better than what we had lost. Our traditions would be different now, shaped by just the two of us, but they would be authentic in a way that our old traditions had never been, once Marcus's resentment and manipulation had poisoned our family dynamic. The new year brought unexpected developments in my personal life. James Parker, a fellow teacher at Emma's preschool who had been quietly supportive during the worst months of the custody battle, asked me out for coffee one afternoon after a parent-teacher conference. James was everything Marcus wasn't: kind, patient, genuinely interested in children, and completely without guile or hidden agendas. Our first coffee date turned into a long conversation about teaching, parenting, and the challenges of single parenthood. James was divorced himself, with a 6-year-old son named Tyler, who attended the same preschool as Emma. He understood the complexities of co-parenting with a difficult ex-spouse, and he listened to my story without judgment or unsolicited advice. "You're incredibly strong," James said as we prepared to leave the coffee shop after 2 hours of conversation. "What you did to protect Emma, the way you fought for her, it's amazing. Tyler's mother would never have gone to those lengths to protect him from his father's neglect." This compliment, coming from someone who understood the challenges of high-conflict divorce, meant more to me than James could have known. For months, I had questioned whether my actions during the custody battle were justified or if I had crossed ethical lines in my determination to win. Hearing validation from someone whose opinion I respected helped quiet some of the self-doubt that had been plaguing me. James and I began seeing each other regularly, carefully and quietly at first, mindful of the need to protect both our children from the complications of adult relationships. Emma liked James immediately, drawn to his gentle manner and his obvious affection for children. Tyler was more reserved, still processing his own parents' divorce, but he gradually warmed to me as he realized I wasn't trying to replace his mother and his father's affections. Marcus's reaction to news of my relationship with James was predictably negative. He accused me of moving on too quickly, of exposing Emma to inappropriate situations, and of using my new relationship to further alienate Emma from him. His complaints to the supervised visitation center were investigated and found to be baseless, but they served as a reminder that Marcus would continue to look for ways to make my life difficult, even within the constraints of the custody order. The appeal of the custody decision was finally heard in spring, almost 6 months after the original trial. Catherine and I attended the appellate hearing, where Marcus's lawyers made their arguments about improper evidence and judicial bias, while Catherine defended the thoroughness and fairness of the original proceedings. The appellate judges asked pointed questions about the recordings and their admissibility, but seemed skeptical of the claims that they had been improperly obtained or prejudicial. The appellate decision came down 2 weeks later, upholding the original custody order in its entirety. The judges found that the recordings had been properly admitted as evidence, that Judge Martinez had shown no bias in her interpretation of the testimony, and that the evidence had clearly supported the conclusion that Marcus was not acting in Emma's best interests when he sought custody. Marcus's options for further appeal were limited and expensive, and his lawyer advised him to focus on completing the requirements for unsupervised visitation, rather than continuing to challenge the custody decision. This advice marked the beginning of what felt like a final resolution to our legal battle, though I remained cautious about declaring victory too soon. By Emma's 5th birthday, our life had settled into rhythms that felt sustainable and healthy. Emma was thriving in kindergarten, making friends easily, and showing the kind of confidence that comes from feeling secure in her primary relationships. Her visits with Marcus had become routine and unremarkable, supervised sessions where they played games and read books without drama or conflict. James had become a steady presence in our lives, someone Emma could count on for patience and kindness and genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. Their relationship developed naturally and without pressure, built on mutual affection rather than any attempt to replace the father she already had. For myself, I had found a kind of peace that felt both hard-won and fragile. The woman who had fought so fiercely for Emma's custody was still there inside me, ready to emerge if needed, but she no longer felt like a stranger. I had learned that strength could coexist with kindness, that protecting those you love sometimes required difficult choices, and that the person you become in crisis might be closer to your true self than the person you were in comfort. The recordings that had seemed so damning and necessary during the custody battle had been filed away with the other legal documents, remnants of a war that I hoped would never need to be fought again. But I kept them, not as weapons but as reminders of what I had overcome and what I was capable of when everything I loved was threatened. Emma still asked about Daddy sometimes, wondering why he seemed different during their visits than he had when they lived together. I told her that people sometimes change, that growing up means learning to see others more clearly, and that it was okay to love someone while also recognizing their limitations. As I watched Emma blow out the candles on her 5th birthday cake, surrounded by friends and family who genuinely cared about her happiness, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. The path had been difficult and painful, marked by betrayal and legal battles, and the loss of dreams I had once held dear. But it had also led to a life that was authentic and sustainable, built on truth rather than illusion. Emma was safe and loved and free to become whoever she was meant to be, without the weight of manipulation or emotional neglect that had threatened to crush her spirit. And I had discovered strengths and capabilities that I never knew I possessed, qualities that would serve me well as I continued to navigate the challenges of single parenthood and new relationships. The war was over, but the victory belonged to all of us, to Emma, who had emerged from her parents' conflict with her spirit intact, to me, who had learned to fight for what mattered most, and even to Marcus, who now had the opportunity to build a genuine relationship with his daughter, based on respect and consistency, rather than control and manipulation. Justice had been served not through punishment or revenge, but through the simple recognition of truth and the protection of an innocent child who deserved better than to be used as a pawn in adult conflicts. And as I tucked Emma into bed that night, listening to her excited chatter about her birthday party and her plans for kindergarten, I knew that every difficult choice had been worth it. 2 years had passed since that pivotal morning when I sat in the courtroom listening to Marcus call me an unfit mother, and I barely recognized the woman I had been then. Emma was now 7 years old, confident and bright, excelling in 2nd grade and completely unaware of how close she had come to losing the stability that had shaped her into the remarkable little person she was becoming. The custody battle felt like something from another lifetime, a dark chapter that had ended so definitively that it sometimes seemed like it had happened to someone else entirely. Marcus had finally completed his court-ordered parenting classes and psychological evaluations 6 months earlier, earning the right to unsupervised visitation with Emma every other weekend. The transition had been gradual and carefully monitored, with Linda Morrison continuing to observe their interactions until both she and the court were satisfied that Marcus had genuinely changed his approach to parenting. To my surprise, he seemed to have taken the lessons to heart, showing up consistently for his visits and demonstrating a level of patience and engagement with Emma that I had never witnessed during our marriage. The man who had once planned to ship our daughter off to boarding school now spent his weekends taking her to museums and parks, helping her with art projects, and actually listening when she talked about her friends and her schoolwork. Emma came home from these visits happy and relaxed, full of stories about their adventures together, and I found myself cautiously optimistic that Marcus had truly evolved into the father Emma deserved. But perhaps the most significant change in our lives was the blended family that James and I had carefully and thoughtfully created. We had married the previous summer in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard, with Emma as my maid of honor and Tyler as James's best man. The children had been part of the wedding planning from the beginning, helping to choose flowers and decorations, and their excitement about officially becoming a family had been infectious. The transition to married life had been surprisingly smooth, helped by the fact that James and I had been living together for over a year before the wedding. Emma adored her new stepfather and had embraced Tyler as the big brother she had always wanted. Tyler, initially reserved about gaining a stepmother and stepsister, had gradually opened up as he realized that our family expansion meant more people to love him, not fewer. James brought a stability and emotional maturity to our household that I hadn't realized I was missing. Where Marcus had been volatile and self-centered, James was steady and considerate. Where Marcus had seen Emma as an inconvenience or a tool for manipulation, James saw her as a delightful addition to his life, someone whose perspectives and opinions mattered, and whose happiness was genuinely important to him. But it wasn't just the contrast with Marcus that made James such a wonderful partner and stepfather. He brought his own gifts to our family, a wry sense of humor that could diffuse tension in any situation, a deep appreciation for the small moments that make up daily life, and an intuitive understanding of children that made him exceptional at navigating the complex emotions that came with blended family dynamics. Emma had started calling James Dad James about 6 months after our wedding, a designation that she came up with entirely on her own to distinguish him from Dad Marcus. The first time she used this term, James had gotten tears in his eyes, and I had seen how much it meant to him to be welcomed so completely into her world. Tyler had followed suit, calling me Mom Jessica, and our family had settled into these natural distinctions that honored everyone's role without diminishing anyone's importance. The contrast between my two relationships couldn't have been starker. Where my marriage to Marcus had been built on illusion and false promises, my relationship with James was grounded in honesty and genuine compatibility. We talked about everything: our hopes for the children, our financial goals, our career aspirations, and our fears about the future. There were no secrets between us, no hidden agendas or unspoken resentments festering beneath the surface of domestic tranquility. James knew everything about the custody battle, had read the transcripts of the hearings, and listened to the recordings that had sealed Marcus's fate. But rather than being intimidated by the fierce woman I had become during that dark period, he admired her strength and determination. He understood that protecting Emma had required me to access parts of myself that I hadn't known existed, and he loved me for my willingness to fight for what mattered most. "You're like a mama bear," he told me one evening as we watched Emma and Tyler building an elaborate fort in our living room. "Gentle and nurturing most of the time, but absolutely ferocious when your cubs are threatened. It's one of the things I love most about you." This acceptance of all aspects of my personality, including the warrior woman who had emerged during the custody battle, helped me finally make peace with the choices I had made during that difficult time. I no longer questioned whether I had been justified in recording Marcus's conversations or hiring investigators to document his neglect. Those actions had been necessary to protect Emma, and the results spoke for themselves. Emma was thriving in ways that would never have been possible if Marcus had succeeded in his plans for her. She was confident and outgoing, surrounded by adults who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide them. She had a stepfather who delighted in her creativity and curiosity, a stepbrother who included her in his games and adventures, and a mother who had learned that love sometimes required difficult choices and uncomfortable battles. The supervised visitation center where Emma had spent so many Saturday mornings with Marcus was now just a memory, replaced by normal father-daughter activities in Marcus's apartment or outings to places they both enjoyed. Marcus had even started including Melissa in some of these visits, and to my surprise, Emma seemed to like her well enough. Melissa had apparently taken parenting classes of her own and had learned to interact with Emma in age-appropriate ways that didn't try to replace me or compete for Emma's affections. This evolution in Marcus's household dynamic was perhaps the most unexpected outcome of our custody battle. The recordings had revealed a man who saw his daughter as a burden and his girlfriend as someone who would help him escape the responsibilities of parenthood, but the court-ordered intervention had forced both of them to confront the reality that Emma was a permanent part of Marcus's life, and they had apparently decided to embrace that reality rather than continue resenting it. I didn't fool myself into thinking that Marcus had undergone a complete personality transformation. The capacity for selfishness and manipulation that the recordings had revealed was probably still there beneath the surface. But he had learned to control those impulses, at least where Emma was concerned, and he had discovered that being a good father brought its own rewards that were more satisfying than the shallow pleasures he had once prioritized. Emma's relationship with her father had evolved too. She no longer idolized him the way she had as a small child, but she enjoyed their time together and looked forward to their weekend adventures. She had learned to see him as he really was, someone who loved her but who had limitations, someone who was trying to be better but who would never be the kind of parent who put her needs ahead of his own desires. This realistic assessment of Marcus's character was actually healthier than the idealization that had once characterized Emma's feelings about her father. She loved him without depending on him for her sense of security or self-worth, understanding instinctively that her primary emotional safety came from our household while her relationship with Marcus was something separate and additional. The financial aspects of our divorce had been settled long ago, with Marcus paying generous child support that reflected his substantial income and his desire to avoid further legal battles. He had also established a college fund for Emma that would ensure her educational future was secure, regardless of any changes in his circumstances. These arrangements gave me peace of mind about Emma's material welfare and allowed me to focus on the more important work of nurturing her emotional and psychological development. My own career had flourished in unexpected ways since the divorce. The confidence and strategic thinking skills I had developed during the custody battle had translated into leadership opportunities at school, and I had been promoted to curriculum coordinator for the entire district. The position came with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to influence educational policy for hundreds of children, work that felt meaningful and aligned with my values. James had been incredibly supportive of my career advancement, taking on more of the household responsibilities when my job required evening meetings or weekend workshops. His willingness to be a true partner in all aspects of our life together was yet another contrast with Marcus, who had always expected me to subordinate my professional aspirations to his needs and priorities. Tyler and Emma had become genuine siblings, with all the complexity that entailed. They played together and looked out for each other, but they also bickered and competed for attention in perfectly normal ways. Watching them navigate these relationship dynamics had taught me valuable lessons about the difference between healthy family conflict and the toxic manipulation that had characterized my marriage to Marcus. When the children argued, James and I worked together to help them resolve their differences and learn from their mistakes. There was no favoritism or divide-and-conquer tactics, no using one child's behavior to punish or control the other. The contrast with how Marcus had once used Emma as a weapon in our adult conflicts was stark and sobering. As Emma's 8th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on how much our lives had changed since that terrible day when I first heard Marcus planning to destroy our family. The scared, desperate woman who had made those initial recordings seemed like someone from another lifetime, though I knew she was still part of me, ready to emerge if Emma's welfare was ever threatened again. But more than anything, I felt grateful. Grateful for the strength I had found when I needed it most, grateful for the legal system that had ultimately protected Emma's interests, grateful for James and Tyler and the beautiful family we had built together. Most of all, I was grateful for Emma herself, for the resilient, joyful child she had become despite everything she had witnessed during those dark months. On the morning of Emma's birthday, as I watched her open presents surrounded by people who genuinely loved her, I thought about the recording that had changed everything. That conversation, captured in desperation and played in a moment of supreme vindication, had seemed like the most important thing in the world at the time. But looking at Emma now, surrounded by laughter and affection, and the secure knowledge that she was valued for who she was, I realized that the recording had been just the beginning. The real victory wasn't what had happened in that courtroom 2 years ago. The real victory was this: a little girl who felt safe and loved, who had learned that families could be complicated, but that she would always have adults in her life who would fight for her happiness. The real victory was the knowledge that justice wasn't just about punishment or revenge, but about creating space for healing and growth, and new possibilities. Emma blew out her candles and made a wish, and as I watched her face light up with joy, I knew that whatever she had wished for, the most important wishes had already come true. She was safe, she was loved, and she was free to become whoever she was meant to be. And sometimes, that's the only victory that really matters. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.